Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions. Welcome to Women We Should Know.
Welcome back to Women We Should Know, the podcast where we consistently bring you the voices, the audacity, the courage of women who do not color inside the lines, who do not climb in boxes created by someone else, who are out there breaking down paradigms, challenging status quos. And the most beautiful thing about every guest who comes on this show is that as she is doing this, as she is creating new pathways, they all leave the light on so that we can see where to follow if that is the direction we want to take. So thank you for being with us. And as usual, I have yet another amazing woman. And so, as usual, I have yet another amazing woman. Marsha Clark is an independent consultant who founded her own company in the year 2000. Marsha has designed, developed, and delivered programs supporting leadership development, change management, strategic planning, performance management, team development, and executive coaching. She has been delivering specific leadership development programs for women for over 20 years. Now, an Amazon best-selling author in 2 categories for Embracing Your Power, Marsha also produces a weekly podcast, Your Authentic Path to Powerful Leadership. Prior to starting her own company, she worked at EDS for 21 years, where she advanced from secretary to corporate officer. Yes, this woman is no shrinking violet, and we are so proud to have her with us to share with you today. Hello, Marsha. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for that very gracious introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. I, like you, love what I do, and I'm a big supporter of women, and I want to put that in every possible, venue and avenue that we can put it, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. I am thrilled to have you here to speak to these women, and I am honored to have someone who has been carrying the torch in front of many of us for any number of years. I have a little tradition.
Okay.
I like to ask my guests in the very beginning, what has already inspired you today?
When I think about a program like yours that is focused on bringing audacious women who are not shrinking violets and who don't fit into some status quo box, the inspiration for me is that about the women who are choosing to lift other women up. And I am always inspired by that. And I think you and I have talked about, I close every one of my podcasts with, here's to women supporting women. So every opportunity that I get to both live that as well as teach that, model that, if you will, I want to take advantage of that, because we as women, we learn through relationships, we learn through stories, we learn through she can do it, I can do it. And so I love that you have chosen to do a podcast that showcases and highlights wonderful women who can be models, mentors, and guides for others.
Well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I would love for you to share a little bit with our listeners about your personal journey from where you began to where you are now, because women of our demographic, we've been around the sun a few times, and there weren't many of us back then.
Yeah. So when I think about what I would call my corporate career, it began in 1978. I had spent 6 years working for the federal government in the Small Business Administration. And quite honestly, the decision to leave that was government was a little too slow for me. Listeners, but I was.
And it has not seemed to speed up.
That's right. That's right. But I wanted something a little more fast paced, a little more variety. So I left the government and I was a Kelly girl for 6 months. And some of your listeners may not know what a Kelly girl is. The augmented staff that got hired to do administrative kinds of fill-in work. So I did everything from filling in for the receptionist, the secretary, opening Christmas accounts at the bank, and so on. And I decided that I wanted to do something that was more futuristic. So I looked at technology, and in the 70s, technology as an industry was just beginning to kind of come into its own.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up going to work for EDS, Electronic Data Systems. It was a company that was founded by Ross Perot. And he hired a lot of Vietnam era veterans, and he was forging an industry, if you will, not just a company, but an industry, because up until then it had been very hardware focused. And so we did software development, systems integration, eventually telecommunications, desktop services, and so on. And in my 21 years there, I did start out as a secretary and climbed the ladder, sort of the one rung at a time, but also did, I think Sheryl Sandberg calls it the jungle gym approach too, where I took lateral moves and learned some things, the breadth of the business. So I really learned business first. And while I was there, learned that I was a good leader based on the feedback that was given to me. And I was also good at developing other leaders. So I was running one of our largest financial services accounts, and I was producing leaders off of my account to staff new business. And I got tapped on the shoulder to say, if you can do this at the account level, we want you to come do this at the corporate level. Because in my time there, the company grew from 5,000 employees to 145,000 employees. So growth was happening and we needed good leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like a kid in a candy store.
I bet. I
get to talk to people who've written books about leadership. I get to talk to great leaders in all walks of life. And I really began the science of leadership versus the sort of natural inclination of leadership. And that opened up all kinds of possibilities for me. And so spent several years working to create every kind of aspect of leadership and executive development, and then was asked to go be president of our healthcare business unit, where I got to practice what I was preaching, and ran a business that was almost $1 billion in revenue, 2,500 people around the world, and 40 clients, responsible for everything from product and service development to delivery and maintenance. And so that really gave me an understanding of what it meant to run a big business. And I left after 21 years when a new CEO was brought in whose values did not align with mine. So here I had risen to the ranks of corporate officer, loved this company, got to do things I never imagined I could do. And now it just wasn't fitting. And so it was a 9-month process, Leslie. The first 3 months was getting to know this new CEO. The second 3 months was the agony of, do I stay? Do I not stay? Do I?
Right.
And I finally figured out, what I know to be true is that I'd never had a boss that I couldn't figure out how to work for them and be successful. When I realized that for the first time in my career that I didn't want to learn how to work for this boss because getting too much out of me because of the values misalignment. So, the last 3 months was basically planning my exit strategy to ensure that I got all the things that I had earned and had coming to me, because this new CEO had been trying to pull some shenanigans, if you will, in regards to that. And
it's good for you that you stood up for yourself.
Well, that to me is the most courageous professional thing I had done to that point. And it helped me to know that living by our values, I wanted to be able to get up in the morning and look myself in the mirror and like who I saw, looking back at me. And I knew that that's something that I needed to do. And it was the best decision because that then launched my own entrepreneurial career that I'm going on 24 years. And if you would have told me that that would have been true, at the time I left, I would have said, oh, no. But here I am at almost 71 years old, still doing what I love and enjoying tremendously the work, the clients, the prospects, and the possibilities of leaving this world or helping this world to be a better place.
Well, kudos to you and thank you for carving that path and leaving the light on.
My pleasure.
Now, in reference to women and in reference to helping women develop their leadership identity, can you tell us a little bit about how you help them establish their presence with themselves? Because that's where we must start. It's an inside-out job.
Yeah. Everything that I do starts with self-awareness. The leadership literature says the biggest derailer or showstopper for anyone is the lack of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. The understanding my own habits, patterns, defaults. But also, and this to me is equally important about self-awareness, is how am I showing up to other people? As the one coin is me knowing myself. The other side of that coin is seeing how other people see me, interpret me, receive me. And that's where the derailing can happen. So starting with self, we typically look at what are your values, both personal and professional, because that's that core, that center, that grounding, that touch point. We then look at how much risk are you willing to take? I mean, are you willing to break glass? Are you willing to take incremental steps? Are you willing to try new and different things? And then we then look at strengths. What are the things that I'm really good at? And, for the benefit of your listeners, if I may, Leslie.
Of course.
I look at a professional journey in 5 stages, if you will. The first stage is a job. We get out of school, whether it's high school, tech school, undergrad, grad, whatever. And I think of that as the time of, I want some financial security and I want some independence, right? So maybe I live in my parents' house or I'm buying my first new car. I'm starting to make payments on my student loans, whatever all that might be. But that's what a job represents, is financial security and some independence. And then we work a little while and we get to the phase of careers. And careers are when my ambition starts to kind of tingle inside, right? I think I could do a little more. I'd like to try that over there. What do you have to do to go do that? And so we make those things known and we work towards whether it be increasing or just expanding our experiences, maybe our skill set, and so on. And then once we are managing career and having some movement and that sort of thing, then it comes to strengths. And when I discover my strengths, and this for me was the leadership, that was that's
the juice.
The juice, that's right. And so that then led me from career to calling. So when to my strengths, I'm living that calling, if you will.
Right.
Then the next phase, if you will, is purpose. And that's when I figure out what I'm passionate about. What brings me joy? What makes me feel like I've really delivered value to my clients today? Mm-hmm. That purposefulness. And so when I match strengths and passion, that's when I'm living my purpose. Now, I will tell you, that's where I am. I'm kind of one step in purpose. And then that 5th step is legacy. So I age, right?
Right.
2 years. And so I'm, as you say, we've been around the sun a couple of times. So I know that from a legacy standpoint, what I want is to have my grandchildren grow up in a world that values women and girls.
Mhm.
strengths around leadership, my passion around helping women and girls be all that they can be while being themselves. Those two things get me to purpose, and then that legacy piece that says, I want to make sure I've done everything I possibly can before I truly go into a retirement phase. And I don't know when that will, what that will ever look like, because as I say, I enjoy this too much. But
Yes.
how women find themselves is, if you just think about where are you in that continuum. And I will tell you, Leslie, at any point along the way, I couldn't have told you that's where I was. It's that now that I look back on it, I can begin to see what each of those phases or categories really looks like. And that's the thing I'm talking about now, to help people know where they are and what they need to do to get to that next step.
Hindsight's always 2020.
It is. Reflection is a valuable thing to do.
Yes, it is.
What did I learn, and how will that help me going forward, are my favorite learning agility questions.
Yes. Now, when you and I were starting out in the corporate world a number of years ago, the word values was never brought up.
Right.
It was not part of the vernacular. And as I've spoken with women over the years, you may have found the same thing or something different. It really didn't come into play until Gen X had been in the workplace for some time. So I still encounter women that, as I ask them about, well, let's start with your values, they don't know where to start. Do you encounter that? And how do you help women come to understand and negotiate that place?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it was somewhere around the 90s. A values certification program started to,
Right.
and I think it was recognition of the fact, I think every time we move from one generation to the next generation to the next, both as those moving into more senior leadership roles, as well as just making up the majority of the workforce.
Mhm.
So the 78 million baby boomers,
Mhm.
they now make up the smallest percentage of the workforce.
Yes.
Xers, they were the most entrepreneurial, so they may or may not have even been found in the corporate settings.
Right.
And millennials are making up 52% of the workforce. So this idea of, and I'll use continuums because I think life is just a series of,
Right. Right.
the baby boomers lived to work. Work was everything for them. It was all about, it was a command and control, more militaristic leadership style, because so many had come out of World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, and so on, and brought that into the workplace. And then the Gen Xers, the most self-sufficient and self-reliant generation, because many of them were latchkey kids.
That was the generation
That's
that
right.
raised themselves.
That's right. And it shows up in their leadership style. And honestly, their mistrust in organizations, which I think that lack of trust, because so many things got exposed during their lifetimes as national years, that the values piece was sort of the, for every action, there's a reaction. So
Yes.
things that would cause us to mistrust, what can we grab onto?
Right.
Will give us a greater sense of trust. And so it was when those things begin to happen. And I think our millennials, I know they get labeled oftentimes with the entitlement and they're not willing to work. I don't agree with any of that.
I don't either.
Working, and they may work differently than we did, and we can learn something from that as well. But
I find that millennials want to know why.
Yeah.
We didn't. As boomers, we didn't ask why. Gen Xers didn't even know who to ask why. They'd never had any stable authority figures or support figures in their life. And so now millennials want to know why. And it seems like they're being argumentative, but they're just wanting to understand something that we overlooked.
Well, and I will tell you that the literature, the research also says, if you can answer their why with some logic and credibility, they'll listen to you.
Exactly.
They'll learn from that.
Exactly.
But if you either just say, remember how as a parent, when the 4-year-old asked us the 87th question in the last 5 minutes, and we just said, because I said
so.
Yeah. And I think
Yes.
in terms of the boss, reaction or response to, why are we doing this? Because I said so. Just go do it. Don't ask any questions. And I just think that is a part of where if it doesn't align with what I perceive to be the right thing, then I get on board. I'm not just going to automatically or blindly follow because you have more positional power than I.
Right. I'm sure you heard this. I know I heard it. Because it's your job.
Oh, yeah.
There was no understanding or rationale. It was just because it's your job or because that's what I pay you for. That was another one that was really common.
Well, and as far as if there were any personal issues, and again, women have 2 full-time jobs, right? We spend the average is 60 hours, just like men do at our work office.
Yes.
Tasks and things. And we spend another 35 hours at home doing domestic work. So we have 2 full-time jobs.
Yes.
This idea of just check your personal stuff at the door, like it's not going to exist. And, it's still not, I'm not carrying it around with me all day. So
right.
Don't take it personally. It's only business because it's your job. It's what I pay you to do, all that. We don't accept that anymore.
No, thank goodness.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes. I always say we were the generation that took the world from the black and white world of leave it to Beaver and make room to Daddy into the psychedelic nation where nobody knew what was going on, but we knew that we needed a change.
That's right.
Yes. Yes. Now, you have 4 C's that I find really grounding and empowering: clarity, competence, courage, and commitment. Can you address your 4 C's?
Yeah. So clarity to me is I've got to be clear about who I am first, where those values, my principles, the beliefs that I hold, how I want to live my life. And once I get clear about who I am, how do I want to give the most or the best of me? So what am I trying to accomplish? And that to me is where that career calling purpose comes into play. Because if I know who I am and I know where I want to go, then I can make decisions that put me on that path or keep me on that path. It doesn't mean I'm not going to learn things and make adjustments or, detours required and all of that. Mm-hmm. This gives me a touch point. It's sort of the opposite of the Lewis Carroll quote of, if you don't know where you're going, any path will do.
Right.
It's not very efficient.
No.
It can bring some heartache. So getting clear on the front end, I think is extremely important. And it is the number one thing that I think helps you. The second being competence building, the skills, having the variety of experiences that give me breadth and depth. I think one of the most important leadership words is perspective, right? If I have very few experiences or have done very few things, my perspective is pretty narrow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm either constantly being blindsided or surprised because somebody sees it differently or thinks a different way might be more effective. And so the competence of a variety of experiences, open to the learning of one, and being receptive to other people's ways of thinking, being, and doing. Some of my favorite prompts, if you will, are tell me more about that. That's fascinating. And what I do and teach in my classes is if I find myself in some sort of judging or blaming or criticizing because you said something that I'm like, where on earth, did that come from?
Sure.
I used to, inside my head, I might be going, oh gosh, and I just kind of check out. But what I learned was I give myself a prompt now when I find myself moving to that judging, criticizing, and I say, isn't that fascinating? Because it's different than the way I'm thinking.
Right.
And then I ask myself, what else could be true? perhaps their truth is going to open all kinds of doors for me.
Yes.
And it's a way of broadening. So that's where the competence gets built up.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know now that the research shows us that our developing our emotional intelligence has a higher correlation to our success in our lives than the intellectual quotient.
Yes.
I think that's important for people to understand as well.
Yes.
Then the courage. Courage is big.
Mm.
And what requires courage from me could be different than what requires courage from you.
Right.
And so I often talk about this in terms of the Winston Churchill quote, which is, it takes courage to know when to stand up and speak, and it takes courage to know when to sit down and listen.
Yes.
I think our ability to discern and really have the judgment to know when to stand up and when to sit down is important. And being thoughtful about that in a way that I am looking at what result are we trying to achieve and what impact will this have on our relationship? Because I think relationships go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then the last C of commitment. I think commitment is, I'm going to see this through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that we're trying to solve, that we're doing it in a way that brings logic, evidence, and intuition, and takes into account the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Your listeners by now figured out I have a lot of quotes and things that I rely on to kind of be my touch point. And one is by a woman, Margaret Cavendish, and it's, one can be of a different opinion and still be my friend. And
yes,
this idea of I'm committed, and if we're on different pages and thinking about how this needs to happen, how can we get together and work towards that end? And if it's solely reliant on me to make it happen, I'm going to work all day, all night, and do whatever I have to, and set appropriate expectations and boundaries around that so that I'm not having to work, 100-hour weeks for months at a time. So, that the wisdom of age comes with the latter part of that. But I learned an awful lot by saying, yes, I'll be glad to help you with that, and then learning and moving forward and making it happen.
Mm-hmm. One word you said repeatedly that is not in a lot of business books, but this is so important to women, and that is relationship.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I used to tell the guys that I worked with at EDS, because I was often the first and only woman in the room, and I would tease them about it. I would say, look, you get stuff done, results. I get stuff done. The difference is they want to work for me again.
And that is the difference.
That is
the quantified difference. Harvard Business Review, Forbes, they've all come out with studies in the last few years that 73% of all employees, men and women, would rather work for a woman. And they cite the relationship as the reason.
Well, and in addition to that, when you look at the studies that have been done about what are the characteristics of a strong leader, women have the majority of it.
Yes, they do.
Tips, collaboration, with all the cross empathy. And so let me take that word, empathy, because I think what women also bring is compassion.
Yes.
And so you were talking about the Harvard Business Review. They did an article that talked about pity, sympathy, empathy, and compassion.
Oh.
Pity is, I feel sorry.
Right.
Sympathy, my words, not theirs. But in Texas, we have this saying, bless your heart. Right. Southern saying all around.
Southern saying.
And it's not always.
No, it's not.
So let's just be real about that. And then you get to empathy, which is walk a mile in my shoes. And I know there's a lot of being written now about we need more empathetic leaders. And I do think that being able to read the room, are people connecting with what you're saying? Are people quizzical about what you're saying? Are they pushing back? So being able to read the room, I think empathy applies there. But I also think about, and this is more in the context of diversity and inclusion, and that is that I can look and work and think with another woman and have some things in common because we're women.
Mm-hmm.
I can't know what it means to be a woman of color. I
No.
can't know what it means to be, an Asian man. I can't know what it means to be fill in the blank of something that is not me. And that doesn't limit me in supporting you. And that to me is where the compassion comes in. That you and I can have a different life story. I can hear your story and I can support you and want to be in partnership with you. Where we have a strong relationship. And I therefore would say we may need more compassionate leaders, empathetic leaders. Because if I'm working for a man, the chances that they understand what it means to be a woman in the workplace is pretty slim.
That's a really brilliant point. Thank you for that, Marsha. That's a really, really brilliant point. I know you really help women to understand that it's important and to find the place of comfort in themselves to begin asking for what they want. I think this is one of the things that really holds women back is our fear of negotiating, our fear of asking for what we want. How do you support women in that?
So I start with the notion of power. And the 3 words you'll see in everything I do is authentic, leadership, and power. And I'm not talking just about positional power, which is the job title.
Right.
I think about it more in terms of personal power. Mm-hmm. Positional power someone gives to me and therefore someone can take it. Personal power is inside of me to use and hold on to share, to work with someone else to do something that neither of us could do on our own, or I give it away. And I give it away by not asking for what I want and need, or not speaking up when I think there's a better way or a different consideration or an incomplete approach that I think will, lead us down the wrong path. All of those things are ways in which we give away. The reality is that the research shows that men have a 2 to 3 times greater what's called asking propensity. They are likely to ask for what they want 2 to 3 times more than women do. And part of that is we just don't see negotiations as a part of our lives.
No, we don't.
Even though, Leslie, we do as mothers all the time. Eat your vegetables, you can have dessert. That's a negotiation.
That is a negotiation.
You can go to the mall, right? Mm-hmm. Yet we don't think about that as possibilities in our professional lives. So, the basics of negotiations and how to ask and that sort of thing is a part of what we do. And the other is the likability factor. So again, the research says that both men and women need to come armed with data and a strong business case and be resilient. Don't take no for an answer. I mean, you got to bounce back up and say, well, have you thought about it? Let me, go do some research on that, bring it back. The additional requirement for women that is not a requirement for men is our likability.
Yes.
The likability factor is smile, non-threatening, non-confrontational language. So we as women, what we have to learn is how to, the timing of it, of when to push back or when to challenge. And that's basically better done one-on-one. And then when we go into the big room where everybody's there, you and I are on the same page. So that's
right. We're already there.
And give me courage.
Right.
And then there's all the socialization that happens with little girls and little boys. And, it's
I know.
Some of it is innate. So let me give you this. They're called the pink and blue blanket studies. In the first 24 hours of a baby's life, a boy baby pays more attention to noise, gross movement. So if the nurse is walking across the nursery, he'll notice that, or the blinking lights and the noise that the machinery makes. Little girls, and get this, they look at their caregiver space 400 times more in the first 24 hours of their lives. The eyes, the mouth, the face, because they're building a relationship.
They're already relational.
Yes. And we that's not socialization. That's innate. That's biology.
Yes.
And then that continues to play out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we as women don't always appreciate things like what Title IX has done, where women's sports gets some support in schools. Mm-hmm. The company EY had done a study, a white paper, where they talked about women who make it to the C-suite. The vast majority of them have played on competitive high-level sports teams because they've learned to take a loss and not think it's devastating. You learn
to take it personally,
not take it personally. You know, to be resilient. We're going to lose today, but we're going to win tomorrow. Something that boys learn that it's really hard for us as women sometimes is you want the best people on your team, even though you may not quote unquote like them. And
that's right.
You can be the biggest bully on the playground, but if you can hit a home run, I want you on my team.
On my team. That's right.
And I have so many women who are like, well, I'm not going to go take that job over there because I don't really like them. I don't like this person or I don't like that. And I just have to say, and I understand it, and yet there will be limitations that if that's the decision you go to.
Yeah.
I think recognizing, and it's the self-talk too, who am I to ask for this and all of that kind of thing. So I go through a whole series of questions and coaching tips on, and this comes to compensation because we know that women, have historically made, I think now it's 82 cents on the dollar for white women, mm-hmm. and for African-American women and 43 or something for Latinas.
Latinx.
Yeah. And so we know that that's wrong.
Yes.
And what I don't know, so what I tell women is always know your market value. And that, always be friends with an executive search or headhunter so that they can tell you what's going on in the market. Know your market value. And here's the language when asked, what are your compensation expectations? I say to you as the potential hiring or promoting manager, I know that the market value for this job is X to Y. Based on my stellar track record of performance, I believe that I should be paid at the upper end of this salary range. And then you be quiet. They now know you've done your homework. They now know, and what the phrase that men often use is, here's what I would need in order to say yes. And they put a dollar amount out. They may say, I need to increase staff. They may say, I need more budget. They may say, they'll do all that kind of stuff. And we just go, sure, I'll do it.
I call it the yes, thank you syndrome.
That's right. That is so right.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And it happens from girls coming out of college.
Yes.
And it's called the accumulation of disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
Men negotiate almost 5% above the offer. Women only about 2.7%. And if you extrapolate that over time, by the time he's 65, he's making 200,000+ and you're making slightly over 100. And wonder how we got to 82 cents on the dollar. And so we've got to know the facts and we've got to do the preparation, mm-hmm. know that we're worth it. And I will say this to all your listeners. I can't tell you, after teaching this, women have come back to me and go, I asked for it. They gave it to me. I didn't even blink, right? And yet I wouldn't have even asked for it because men are often taught in that competitive world, go with the minimum. And we're taught, oh, they like me. They really like me. Kind of thing.
That's right.
We have to know our value and know what it takes for us to say yes. And you're going to get more time.
We have to give up the Sally Field moment.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Yes.
You should recognize it.
we're rolling in on our close time, but I'm going to stretch this out a little bit because there are two more things I really want to talk to you about. And that is, what motivates you, Marsha, to work specifically with women?
Yeah. It's complicated, right? In this sense, I grew up with a special needs sister, and she was 6 years my junior, and I learned from her the concept of unconditional love and how people treat others who are different than them. And there were some hard lessons for a young girl to learn.
Sure.
I think is at the root of a lot. I also had a mother and father who were much older. They were closer to my friend's grandparents' age than mine. And so that was a very, I'll call it traditional marriage of the woman. I just used to go, what?
Right.
It's hard for me to fathom. And then I think about, I was a big tomboy. I had 2 older brothers, and I played with the boys all the time, and I doing that. So I think I've got, I had a well-developed masculine, because we all have masculine and feminine. And I think I learned a lot about that. I laughingly say, I probably operated more from a masculine standpoint. I always had the relationship component, but really understanding that I said, God led me to do this work so that I could learn that part of me because it had developed as fully. And I see the inequities, the diminishment, the squashing of the human spirit. I see the traumas that women experience and how they are made the victim, are made to feel guilty when they are the victim of things being done to them.
Right.
And a strong sense of right and fairness. And I've got enough fight in me to say, I'm not going to stand aside, quietly, and let this kind of thing continue. So I've got a strong fight. I call myself a social justice warrior for women and girls. And social justice is the big part of that, and so is warrior.
My sister by a different mother.
We're out there.
Yeah. And last but absolutely not least, because I want my listeners to know you did this, what inspired you to write your book and motivates you to develop and produce a weekly podcast?
Yeah. So about 2 years ago, it became pretty clear to me that as far a reach as I hoped to have delivering value, because my women clients in programs and coaching said, they would say things like, where were you when I was 25? Or where were you when I was starting my, professional leadership career? And I realized there's a lot of value in this, and I just can't teach enough people or coach enough people. And so the book and the podcast, I kind of adopted the word accessibility. I wanted that my driver for a few years.
Right.
So how could I make this material friendly for people who didn't sit through a program or, a coaching, but to read the book? The book was written to be used as, I could use it as a solo discussion, questions, reflection, tools, or kind of way. I could do it as a book club. I could do it as part of an employee resource group. If you're really ambitious, you could use it as a guide to develop leadership programs for women. So, and then the podcast came about as a way to bring to life the words on the page. So we do a weekly podcast. We have had now over 20,000 downloads, I'm happy to say, which puts us in a top percentage for podcasts.
Yes.
That most podcasts, there's 7 episodes. We're on our 80th something. And that, they get about 1,000 downloads. So I'm happy with our numbers and want those to continue to grow, because I do think, and we've got women listening from all over the world, because I've had women from over 60 different countries in my program, and I've delivered some in their place and some have been here. But I know there's a need for it, and this accessibility, I want it to be delivered in a way that's useful, valuable, and practical. People often tell me that what differs in the work that I offer is that they'll hear here's what you should do. What they don't get is and here's how you can go about doing that.
Right. They don't get the action point.
That's right. And so they like the tools, they like the language that I offer in ways to be able to say it so that your message is heard and you have a greater likelihood of getting what you want.
Great. So far, just to be absolutely clear for our listeners, you don't have guests. What you do is you utilize your podcast to teach your methodology.
Yes. So we have taken about the first 65 podcast episodes are directly from the book.
Uh-huh.
I will tell you that this book is the first of 3 books. So this one is Embracing Your Power, A Woman's Path to Authentic Leadership and Meaningful Relationships. So it looks at self-awareness and the interpersonal relationship. Book 2 is going to be Expanding Your Power.
Wonderful.
Woman's opportunity to inspire teams and influence organizations. So we've gone from self to interpersonal to team to organization. And those 2 books together really represent the programming, the women's leadership programming that I've done for 20 plus years. And then the 3rd book is going to be Enriching Your Power, A Woman's Opportunity to Lift Others Up. And so that idea is women supporting women. So who's got the seat at the table? Who's scooting over and pulling up another chair for a woman to sit?
Wonderful. So are you going to be willing to come back with each successive book?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Marsha, thank you so much for joining us today. I so appreciate it. And I know all of you out there appreciate it too. Now, just to be really clear, what Marsha was explaining, if you can't get to her, if you can't get to the Leadership Academy, if you can't get to her seminars, you can purchase her book and you can connect with her podcast, which I am sure is on Apple Tunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
That's right.
And so there you go. You have your lesson plan right there in your hands, in your iPhone. So be sure and tune into that. I know that all of you got a great deal out of this. When you're no longer driving, no longer jogging and listening to it in your headphones, and you can sit down with your laptop, be sure and go and see this in person. See the video on the YouTube channel. Subscribe, like, and here come my 2 things. Every time I need to ask you this. Number 1, what one woman do you know who would benefit from this? Now, you may know 20, and if you want to send it to them, fine. But 1, just 1. We can all do 1. What one woman do you know who would benefit from this? Well, be a good sister and send it to her. It's not your job to make sure she watches it. It is your job to be a good sister and send it. And then also comment. At Women We Should Know, we are committed to inspiring expanded conversations, not just coming on this podcast and being talking heads, but expanding conversations between the people who are commenting, between us and you. And so please subscribe, like, share with one woman, be a good sister, and comment. And thank you for tuning in with us again today. And as you go through the rest of your day, please remember, you are stronger and wiser than you know.